This is a really critical moment in the triangulation, I think, of the major players who are struggling for dominance in world culture. But the leftists are too, I'm sorry that they're too stupid, they're too uneducated, they've read history through their own lenses, and they don't understand Islam. They think that Islam is a form of Middle Eastern Arabic Christianity. And a lot of Iranians are Muslim by day and Christian by night.
The representatives from Islam are up on the stage with feminists, so to speak.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
And really, there's some
gays for Gaza.
Yeah, there's some. Why are they on stage with feminists, and what is this strange alliance? And
simple answer is straightforward. It's because what they have in common is a hatred of Jesus. They hate the Christian West.
So if there's 10,000 minority midgets being slaughtered on an island, and the U.S. tries to rescue them, they are against that.
I mean, Justin, let me be naive. So I'm going to try some naivety on you, and then slap me down if you want, because somebody needs to.
Off camera or on camera?
No, on camera. Oh. Well, let me explain some of my frustration as an Englishman, because one of the things we've discovered is that Christianity is being punished in the UK, and Islam is being promoted. So we would both be banned from the BBC. You'd be banned if they knew about you. I am banned. They do know about me.
What did you do? Tell us the true story. Hello, this is Justin from Reclaiming Christendom.
And this is Gavin, also from Reclaiming Christendom.
That's two from Reclaiming Christendom. That's
we're just the vanguard. Wait till they see who else is from Reclaiming Christendom. But
then we'll reclaim it. I was checking in the news with anticipation to see. I find myself checking every few hours to see what's happening in Iran, because that's dominating the headlines right now, and it's big news.
The great danger with our talking about it is that by the time this goes out, we could have a completely new world order, and we'll look a bit. But on the other hand, the things that we need, one of the reasons why you and I have decided to talk about this, apart from the fact that when we find ourselves discussing things personally, we enjoy each other's company and insight, is that this is a really critical moment in the triangulation, I think, of the major players who are struggling for dominance in world culture. And the major players are Christianity, which is beleaguered, it's old school, it's been pressurized, and its two major competitors, which are, of course, some form of Marxism, neo-Marxism, cultural Marxism, and Islam. I've always seen this as best explaining it, rather than getting into sophisticated conversations about what is Christianity, what is Islam, what is Marxism. Because, the moment we start talking about this, clever people say, define your terms. And then the terms are so big, they're really hard to do. But if you simply say, well, look, the followers of three major figures, the followers of Jesus, the followers of Marx, the followers of Muhammad, are coming together, and each of them wants to remake the world in the image of its leader. We want to make the world in the image of Jesus. That's the kingdom of heaven. The Muslims want to make it in the image of their prophetic war leader. That's Islam. And the Marxists want some form of secular, empirical utopianism with an egalitarian outcome. That's Marx. And it just so happens that we're at a really critical moment in world history where the three are vying together. And Iran has been one of the driving forces of destabilizing Christianity and of course, confronting Marxism. One of the things I hope we'll talk about in this conversation together is, if they manage to bring Christianity to its knees, which you and I are fighting very hard to stop happening, in the fight-off between Marx and Muhammad, who's going to win? I don't think people have given that much thought, but I have opinions on it. But anyway, so Iran is in the middle of being toppled. I just want to finish my little introduction. Thank you for letting me speak for a moment. There's a joke going around on the internet at the moment, which is that people like me may very well have to apply to Persia for Christian political asylum to get away from the Islamic Republic of Great Britain, which will, of course, be the first Islamic nuclear power, as J.D. Vance said. So I'm following what's happening in Tehran with great interest, just in case the outcome of a free Persia will grant me political asylum should I need it.
Well, I think it's very interesting that I remember I was very young, but when
You're still very young. You're still very young, Justin. Look at you with this dark hair and this Sicilian visage. You're
well,
you're,
the
you're the child prodigy of reclaiming Christendom.
Yeah, I wish. The revolution was in 1979.
Yeah.
But what's going around on the internet a lot now are the pictures of what Iran looked like before that. So they're showing everybody, if you look at the pictures, you would not think it's Iran. You would think it's Paris or Buenos Aires or something like that. And
I think we have to say, I mean, you were not born then, but I was born and already old in 17. In fact, I was at school with a guy called Khalil Rejai. Rejai was Persian. He was a product of the Ancien Regime, and it was his family got swept away with the Shah. I think one of the things that people don't remember is that the Shah, although it sounds very romantic, and you're quite right, Persian women looked beautiful, liberated, relaxed, and cultured in the Persia of the 60s and 70s. But it was still an autocratic regime. It was still a totalitarian state. It's just that they had a Shah instead of an Ayatollah.
Well, they did, in fairness, the white revolution, which took place during that time, did give women the right to vote. It did give women the right to work. I know there were huge literacy programs going around. So yes, it was autocratic at that.
I think what I'm trying to do is to defend myself against the charge which people are likely to bring, which is that you conservative Catholics show you a king, and if it's whether it's a Bourbon king or a Stuart king in England, you'll immediately jump up and down saying, "Yay, this is great!" Catholic monarchy. But the fact is that the Shah was not. He didn't have a very good reputation for ruling. So although Persia was far more attractive, to my mind, in the 60s and 70s, before the appalling and the dreadful Ayatollahs, Khomeini followed by Khamenei, as we discussed earlier. Right. We can't go back there. We have to, whatever the solution is, if we're going to, not that anyone will listen to us, but I think, you and I realize we're not heading back for a totalitarian monarchy just because, we're swapping Shah for Ayatollah for Shah again. There's presumably got to be something more creative than that.
Well, which definitely raises the question you were talking in the beginning about the Marxists and the Islamists. Right. And I think what we saw there was people talk about the unholy alliance that exists today between the Marxists and the Islamists. Yeah. And I think that what happened there was a very good lesson, because from what I've heard, there was a bit of this alliance before the Ayatollah came in 1979. And what the leftists or the Marxists, however we want to refer to them, found out is that if you side with the Islamists afterwards, the leftists are going to get a kick out of the door. And
I don't think they real. I mean, you're absolutely right. You and I share the same opinion, and I think any intelligent analysis of the last 100 years would recognize that actually Islam is far stronger than utopian Marxism, but the leftists are too. I'm sorry that they're too stupid. They're too uneducated. They've read history through their own lenses, and they don't understand Islam. They think that Islam is a form of Middle Eastern Arabic Christianity, and they imagine that in the same way that Christianity has given way before them for reasons we could explain, they think that Islam will. They think they can seduce Islam with secularism. And they simply don't understand it. When it comes to a conflict between the two, the leftists won't have a prayer. Not that they do pray, but I mean, Islam will wipe the floor with them. And one of the things I've been saying for a long time is that in England, as this triumvirate shapes up, and Christianity stupidly is betrayed by the Enlightenment people who got everything that they enjoy from Christianity. I've been reading again about the scientific revolution. I mean, this is just taking a break, if you don't mind, bring me back. But the Ptolemaic revolution and Copernicus. The fact is that Copernicus didn't invent anything at all. What we call the Copernican revolution was absolutely staged every 50 years by a whole series of Catholic scientists, most of whom were monks. And Copernicus was simply the latest person to to develop some of the scientific theories. But everything that we know about the so-called scientific revolution was Catholic and was scientific and was mainly monastic. And so one of the things that people don't give credit for is the fact that if you get rid of Christianity, the foundation that Enlightenment humanism is left with is really very fragile, and it doesn't stand up in terms of epistemology, faith, belief, conviction, courage, sacrifice. It doesn't remotely stand up to what the Muslims are bringing in terms of commitment to their worldview. So what will happen is that if you lose Christianity in the UK, you'll then get what we've got now, which is a period of leftist totalitarianism, increasingly so. We're losing freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of conscience. People are being locked up. And then in 2030, about when the leftist experiment collapse, Islam will come sweeping in. And then we'll have this extraordinary position where we'll have something that approaches the Islamic Republic of Great Britain, because they've been organizing their power base for some time. And we may discover that Persia has become a generous, democratic, liberal regime where Christians are welcome, because there's a huge Christian, revival going on in Persia. Some friends of mine, or they're not really friends of mine, have been talking about the way in which a lot of Iranians are Muslim by day and Christian by night. They've discovered the New Testament. They come together to read it together, and in the privacy of their homes, there's a growing interest in Jesus, and obviously a growing demoralization with Muhammad, which is why we have this huge political struggle on the streets of Tehran at the moment. As the Persians say to us through X and through elsewhere, we were never Islamic. We were conquered by the Muslims, and we don't want to be Muslim. It's been dreadful for us. Why do you people in Europe imagine for a moment that you'll be better off under the Ayatollahs? Our history has been appalling. Think again. But this extraordinary self-defeating project of unlimited immigration, which is bringing in hundreds of thousands of Muslim warriors ready to be ensconced to do whatever is going to happen, is just it's a piece of civilizational suicide. I still can't work out who's running it.
I think what baffles people all the time, which you were touching on, is why do people on the left back or ally themselves with Islam? Because people will say, you'll even see rallies here in New York or other places where the representatives from Islam are up on the stage with feminists, so to speak.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
And really, there's some
gays for Gaza.
Yeah, there's some genuine people who are really in the middle, and they say, am I confused? Aren't women not allowed to drive or vote or work in these countries? Why are they on stage with feminists? And what is this strange alliance? And a big talking point here is why has the media not been covering this to the degree that it's covered other events? I'm sure over there the BBC hasn't been giving it. Maybe now at this point they're finally doing it. But even the protests here, they have not been supportive. The usual protests, which are the Gaza protests, or here in the United States, the anti-ICE protests. These people have not been protesting for the millions of women who are trying to free themselves, and the thousands. I've heard numbers now, they said 2,000 to 3,000 protesters have been killed, but I've heard numbers that it might be much larger. And the question they ask is, why is the media, which is left-leaning, not siding with this? Now, ideologically, you think they would. It's trying to find rights, it's repress people, it's helping women. You think they would jump on this and start protesting, but it's been a great mystery here in the newspapers, and not just in the United States, in other countries, is why is the left-leaning media not supporting the efforts in Iran?
Well, it's a very good question, and there's a simple answer, and I think then obviously much more complex answers. The complex answers are harder, but the simple answer is straightforward. It's because what they have in common is a hatred of Jesus. They hate the Christian West, and so they've found this allegiance of convenience, because the Muslims hate Jesus and Christianity and Christendom. The Marxists hate Jesus. And because the interesting thing is, I suppose this is going to become quite Freudian if we wanted to let it get that way. But they're both offshoots of Christianity. Both Islam and Marxism are heretical offshoots, one going in a monotheistic direction and the other going in a secular direction. But Marxism took the longing for the kingdom of heaven, the longing for judgment and righteousness, and decided it couldn't wait until heaven. It wanted to do it now by force.
Sure.
But most of its egalitarian and utopian ideas derive from the vision of heaven and judgment that Christians have. And Islam is really quite similar. Islam decided that it also wanted to impose a just monotheistic ethical structure on the world. And unlike Jesus, who left it to us to do it by love, forgiveness, and reconciliation, Muhammad decided he'd do it by the edge of the sword, and he did. And one of the reasons why Islam has spread so successfully is because it's really quite a persuasive way to do it. In fact, I mean, I'm sure again, the thing is, people really don't know the history of Muhammad. They don't know that when he was doing his prophetic thing in Mecca, he was really a failure. No one believed in him. No one liked him. The Christians and the Jews ganged up against him, which is why he wanted to take revenge later on. But when he came out as a warlord and moved to Medina, he suddenly discovered that one of the ways of making people obey your prophetic vision was to threaten to chop their heads off if they didn't. It worked immensely well. And that's how Islam spread. So one of the really critical issues that we have to face today, which goes to the heart of deciding what your anthropology is are human beings more vulnerable to threats with the edge of the sword and fear, or are they more vulnerable to forgiveness and love? And I think that's one of that anthropological question is being played out on the public stage in our century, in our decade at the moment. Which is going to have most effect on people, fear or love?
Well, yeah, and speaking of that, you said they have a common enemy, which is Jesus. There's also, I remember reading about this term campism, and that refers to something on the left where another common enemy is anything. Campism is when anything that the United States does,
yes,
any venture they do, there's a group in the far left that are against it. So if there's 10,000 minority midgets being slaughtered on an island, and the U.S. tries to rescue them, they are against that.
When I grew up in the 1970s, and I had a number of sort of leftish professor friends from Marxist universities, and no, you could not have a single conversation around dinner without them saying, if you said, look, this is bad, and then they'd begin the what about the Americans doing this, as if the whataboutery was actually a sensible way of dealing with the ethical issue. But it just bedeviled 30 years of my adolescence, this constant left sniping at America. What about it? America's made many mistakes. It's got plenty of sins. There's lots of things that American I'm not in favor of, but I love the fact that American at its best exemplifies virtues of Christian culture, which both Catholics and Protestants have worked immensely hard to build, to hard bake into the American Constitution and the American way of life. And of course, it has dreadful excesses from Hollywood to Epstein, but actually we ought to give credit to America for all the things it does, including holding Marxism at bay since the Second World War, because nobody else could.
Well, I think right now, when I check the news, and as I said, I'm checking it often, the big issue here is what is going to happen next, because as a whole, the Americans do not support military intervention, and that's on both sides. Nobody wants the military. Well, not nobody, but I would say the last poll I saw was like 70% of people in the United States do not support military intervention. So
can I just
you really have to ask yourself at this point, what is going to happen? Because it looks like at this point, again, things can change quickly, but the regime is held out up to this point.
The point I want to make is how much I admire President Trump for not engaging the Americans in a kind of overt foreign policy, which for the whole of my life, so one of the criticisms I have of America is the way in which it's managed its foreign policy. And the wonderful thing about Trump as a non-political president was he really wasn't interested in pursuing an aggressive neocon foreign policy. And the world suddenly became a safer place under Trump. I thought it was magnificent. Now, I think the situation we're in at the moment is different, and it's not necessarily Trump's fault. I don't want to be naive about him, but the fact is, if you have a third world war brewing between Iran and Israel, with Iran being given permission by wretched Obama and wretched Biden to develop a nuclear program they were only ever going to use to blow up Israel and start a third world war. Of course, Israel is going to defend itself and say, we don't want to have a nuclear weapon aimed at Jerusalem. So we're going, as always, to defend ourselves. I think one of the interesting things that's going to take place now is who is going to take responsibility for freeing the Persian people from the Ayatollahs. Is it going to be Trump, or is it going to be Israel?
Or is it going to happen at all?
Yes, that's the frightening thing, isn't it?
That is the frightening thing. But if you think about it, this has been going on for, I think, nearly 3 weeks, and there's been other uprisings from what I've heard, this latest crackdown where there's thousands dead has reduced the protests markedly. So
I just don't see how the West. I'm
beginning to wonder if this could be the end of it, or if there is going to be more.
It's very difficult, isn't it? I don't see how the West can, in all conscience, just leave would-be Democrat Persians to be destroyed. I mean, Trump has given them a warning, but in fact, the newspapers I was reading suggested that Ayatollah Khamenei has had 2 standoffs with Trump, and each time he thought Trump was bluffing, and each time Trump was not bluffing, and he's trying it a third time. Is Trump bluffing when he says, if you murder your own people, we won't stand by? At the moment, it looks like Trump is backing down, and although I'm not a hawk in terms of foreign policy, I think there comes a point. It's a bit like when we saw that protester stand in front of the tanks in Tiananmen Square. What do you do in the West when you see a totalitarian regime crush democratic aspirations? And there's not an easy answer, but I think to abandon the Persians to the Ayatollahs yet again would be something that would be very hard for us to live with in terms of our own consciences. Is democracy just for us?
Well, I think a lot of the trepidation is predicated upon who will take over, because there's no bigger disaster.
Like Afghanistan.
If the U.S. knew that this person would take over, person X, and whether it's Reza Pahlavi, I believe his name is, the prince, would take over and everything would go fine, I think they would go forward with something. But this could turn into a quagmire if they intervene and it becomes a vacuum. We've seen this before. And who is going to take over? So I think that's what the trepidation is based on, is what happens afterwards. Usually in the Middle East, what we've seen, it's not a neat, orderly process. Another group doesn't just come in and everything is now fine. So,
and that was the problem with Vietnam. It began in Vietnam. It's all very well to fight, but who are you going to hand over to them, and where do they get their power and legitimacy from? And unless it's an American-backed puppet regime, which we don't believe in because we're Democrats, so we get stuck on the.
I thought you believed in that. That's what you know.
Well, of course, it's a bit like benevolent dictatorship. When everything else falls down, you kind of reach for the strong man and for somebody who will knock heads together and if only save some people from the excesses of totalitarianism. But it's very difficult as a Democrat to replace one strong man with another strong man and still never achieve democracy.
And I always get the feeling with Iran that we only know one small percentage of what's really going on, because we have to remember Russia's involved, China's involved, Venezuela had connections to Iran, North Korea, Venezuela. That's really the group of them. Russia's very close with, I remember reading if Khomeini has to flee, he's going to Moscow. So how are these people involved as we speak right now on this podcast? What's going on between those countries? What's really going on over there? I think we only know the tip of the iceberg.
And you're absolutely, and it turns into my enemy's enemy's enemy. It becomes my ally only because they're my enemy's enemy's enemy. So that's it's not a good way of doing. It's not a principled way of doing world politics. But in fact, maybe there is no principled way, which of course is where American isolationism began. How do you find a principled way of interfering with other people's political failures without becoming the same as them? I think it's very difficult, and it takes us to the whole question of what a Christian world view is, and views have changed from the neocon view. I think had some claim to saying, well, we're trying to spread the influence of Uncle Sam and Billy Graham and Christian morality to people who ought to benefit from it, but at the same time, none of that ever was successful. People often didn't want either democracy or Uncle Sam. They wanted money, but they didn't want freedom. So, I think one of the great dilemmas of certainly the 20th century was that we had these two enormous totalitarian regimes, with democracy being pressed in the middle, and democracy wins after the First and Second War take place, but is completely exhausted, and then loses all its moral integrity, because the world we've built since then is nothing to write home. I remember when I went back to Prague after the Iron Curtain fell, the last time I'd been to Prague, I'd been chased by the security services, arrested, interrogated, or smuggling stuff up.
Wait, did you say this was New York or Prague?
This was Prague, but I understand New York's becoming very similar. But when I went back after the wall had fell, I found three things that weren't there under the communists, and they were McDonald's, which I'm quite fond of, pornography, and graffiti. Well, pornography and graffiti are signs of terrible social decadence. And then I remember thinking to myself, wow, okay, so we got rid of the bastard communists and the bastard torturers and the bastard totalitarians, and we've given them graffiti, McDonald's, and porn. Is that an improvement? And I honestly didn't have an answer. I was very depressed that freeing the East from Marx turned out to be freedom not so much from brutality as freedom to vandalize and to engage in I don't want to be too moralistic, but to engage in pornography. That didn't seem to me to be a win-win situation.
Well, I think the real issue that everybody is asking themselves now, as they check the news every few hours, is, ideally, what could happen here in the best way. That's why Trump, I think, is debating with his team, and from what I've heard inside his team, they're pretty divided with how to proceed.
Yeah, I'm sure they are. Yeah.
What is going to happen here? Because, as you said, he's made some big claims, like you're going to be sorry if you do this, and don't if you execute this person, these terrible things are going to happen. But the question is, as you raised, if this continues, if these start to quiet down now in the next week, and if there's no change, what repercussions will that have? Because it looks like, and I'm not saying it's going to work out that way, but right now, as you hear that they're tapering off a bit, it looks like that has become a very distinct possibility. And where is that going to go? Which I don't have an answer for.
Well, I agree. I mean, and last week we talked and we laughed about Trump, and I enjoyed it very much, and I enjoyed the fact that we instigated some Trump derangement syndrome amongst our commentators who took us for being morons, and partly because they entirely lacked any sense of paradox and sense of humor. They're obviously not people who read G.K. Chesterton, but having taken some delight in the way in which Trump destabilizes opponents by hyperbole, and saying, okay, well, when Trump uses hyperbole, it's a great instrument of powerful negotiating, because it drives people mad, and then after he's driven them mad a bit, he gets to offer some kind of compromise which is more in his favor, and he wins whatever it was he was trying to win. He learned this in big business. It comes very well. But what if what if he's been using hyperbole against Iran, and he's not going to deliver in the same way that, the way we laughed about it, it was he never intended to deliver it. He's not going to invade Greenland. It's a joke. It was always a joke, and it was intended to start a conversation about mineral rights and NATO, paying for NATO. I mean, I think he made that wonderful joke that when he said when Denmark decided to increase its military spending, it brought the Greenlanders an extra dog sled, which it did. I mean, that's exactly what they did do. It's very funny, and it makes the point. But if his threats to Khamenei are hyperbole, then this becomes, I'm no longer an admirer of Trump. I feel he will have failed very badly morally. A very serious moral challenge, which I feel we owe the Persians, and the Americans owe the Persians, because they said, well, we're going to step up and offer you some kind of protection. Then the Iranian state doubles down on its murderous policies, and where is the protection that Trump offered? It cannot be hyperbole if he's going to maintain any moral integrity.
Yeah, well, I agree with that. And the problem, as I said, in the United States is the base is very divided on this.
Sure, of course, understandably.
The MAGA base is extremely, extremely divided. There's part of the Republican Party that wants no involvement whatsoever, the far right, with anywhere. They were even against the quick Venezuelan operation. If you think about Trump's two military operations so far, one bombing the nuclear facilities and the other in Venezuela, both have been quick. Both have had basically no lives lost, American lives lost, and both have been over in a few hours. So those type of operations have been palatable to even the far right. But any sort of military intervention the U.S. gets involved with in foreign affairs that could result in casualties, American casualties, that will have a different effect on the base. So I think a lot of that they're debating right now what to do about those issues.
For sure. Again, they learnt the body bag issue with Vietnam. But look, Justin, let me be naive. So I'm going to try some naivety on you, and then slap me down if you want, because somebody needs to. And
off camera or on camera?
No, on camera. Oh. off camera is another matter. No,
right.
Let me try an idea out on you. What? In terms of the conflict between Islam and Christianity, we're used to Islamists saying, let's express some fraternal solidarity from one group of Muslims to another. So whether it's the Shia Muslims in Iran backing Hezbollah or any of the other terrorist agency, there's a great sense of Islamic solidarity to spread Islam in the soft West. Why aren't the American Catholic bishops saying to Trump, we'd very much like to spread Christian Catholicism back into Persia? There was plenty. Well, it was more Orthodox and Oriental, but there was plenty of Christianity in Persia before these brutal Ayatollahs took over and quashed it. Do we not have some duty in terms of Christendom as Catholics to say, well, we belong to the strongest nation in the world. These people are behaving brutally and immorally. Why don't we give the Persians a chance to believe in Christianity? Let's do to the Muslims what they do to us. Let's take the fight there, and with the intention of giving people freedom of choice to believe in Jesus afterwards. But I mean, okay, this is very bullish, and I expect it's over the top, and I hope you'll slap me down and explain what's wrong with such a naive attitude. But I'd kind of like to have a whisper of it somewhere rather than total silence from the bishops.
No, I agree with you. I don't think it's total bullish. It's just that we've been so really beaten over the years that we don't even think about such things.
Right.
But I think it's a very practical thought. I think it would come from the other side in a second, and I think it's something reasonable to put on the table. I mean, ultimately, you're talking,
and they are doing it to us. Yes.
Yeah. Ultimately, you're talking about the possibility of freedom of religion.
Right. Exactly. Yes. Which is what Christianity likes to practice.
Right. And why can't this country have freedom of religion? That's what you're talking about. And I would hope most people, Western people, would like a solution, no matter how you see it, where there's freedom of religion again. I would more phrase it that way. And then
Sure.
let's see who chooses what. Let there be, freedom for the bishops to push the Catholic Church there, and let the other religions have a fair go as well. But I would phrase it more like that. What is so bad about asking to form a free society with freedom of religion again? And I think if they did, you would see Christianity, Catholicism specifically, grow very quickly there.
Well, let me explain some of my frustration as an Englishman, because one of the things we've discovered is that Christianity is being punished in the UK and Islam is being promoted. So we're having this two-tier justice system, two-tier politics, two-tier justice, two-tier policing. And if you stand up on a street corner and you read from the Bible, the police will come along and say, you're being offensive, and if you don't stop, we'll arrest you, because the gays don't like St. Paul's being read, and so you're causing offense. But if you have 100,000 Muslims chanting from the river to the sea, not that they know which river and which sea, calling for genocide of Jews, or terrorizing Jewish diners outside a Jewish restaurant in London, the police will do nothing at all. So when the Christians just act in a relatively restrained and civilized way as Christians in the public, they get smacked down in our society, and Muslims get given a free pass. So we don't even have the even-handed freedom of, we've lost the even-handed freedom of religion in the West that we're talking about offering to Persia. It would be a wonderful thing if we could somehow achieve even freedom. I remember, it reminds me of the question that was asked Gandhi when he came to London in the 1930s. And what do you think of Christian Western civilization, Mr. Gandhi? And he said, I think it would be a very good thing to have. What do you think of freedom of religion in the West? It would be a very good thing to have. I wish we had it. We don't have it. What we're talking about in terms of giving it to the Persians is all very well. Great idea. But nice to give it to Londoners as well.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we definitely see, here in the United States, I see stories all the time. I think in another episode, we can talk about that. What's going on over there in terms of people being arrested, street preachers. You lead, as I think we mentioned this last time, I saw a chart that the UK leads the world in online arrests, online offense arrests, but it's not even close. I never knew Russia has 1/20 of the online arrests, as some guy eating fish and chips and typing something. So yes. I think the situation there is dire. I think we can talk about that because I don't think most people realize that. I think they hear about it, but they say, oh, they must be exaggerating or something. It really can't be that bad.
Well, even I don't believe it's that bad, and until the police come knocking at my door, and I suspect that they might very well do. One of the great things we can celebrate was in the newspapers today was the wretched BBC, which has just become a propaganda station for the left-leaning liberal establishment, has been finally overtaken by YouTube this week. So what you and I are doing here on YouTube now as a platform is now, I think the figures are something like 54 million to 50 million. There are 50 million people who watch the BBC in the UK, and 4 million who watch what we're doing here, YouTube. So one of the reasons I think why you and I are doing this is because we believe we have a duty to do it, and there's a reasonable chance it'll be effective. And we would both be banned from the BBC. You'd be banned if they knew about you. I am banned. They do know about me.
So they don't take you on the BBC. Oh, well.
I'm on a blacklist. I did. Can I tell you the story very briefly? I mean,
I'm sure. Yes, let's hear about it. What did you do? Tell us the true story.
I had a very effective radio program. So, I mean, it was pure luck. There was a producer of the Southeastern BBC Faith and Ethics program on Sundays. Her figures were really bad. She went through the interviewees they'd had in the last year, and she said, that voice, give the program to that voice. And that voice happened to be me. So they said, they brought me in. They said, would you like a radio program? And I said, you bet. So they trained me up. They gave me a radio program. The figures went from 10,000 to 100,000 in terms of the listener base. It was very successful. It was 3 hours every Sunday. And people became Christians because I got Christians on to tell their stories of conversion. And the BBC didn't really know what was going on, except there came a point when somebody put 2 and 2 together and said, how are we going to stop Ashenden? It's much too successful in terms of, we cannot have Christian propaganda on the BBC like this, with people becoming Christians. The dangerous moment came. I had an annual review. Everyone has an annual review. And then the fourth year, they said, by the way, this is your second annual review. And I said, there's no such thing as a second annual review. You only have, oh, no, we're giving you a second annual review. So this cannot be good news.
Oh, biannually.
Yes, that's right. Yes, no, just a second annual review. So they came in, they said, we want to professionalize your program. I said, yeah, well, so how are we going to do that? That's a great idea. Well, we're worried about the way you read the Bible. We'd like the Bible read in a more professional way. I said, well, I'm quite good at reading the Bible. I've been on stage. I have a good Shakespearean voice, if necessary. No, we're not thinking of that. What we'd like to do is we'd like to get an actor, a paid actor, to read out the Bible passages you want. And so the way it's going to work is this: he's going to come in on Wednesdays, and you give him the Bible passages that you want read out for your live radio show on Sunday. And I said, but it will have occurred to you, as it occurs to me, it's a live radio show, so I don't know what people want to talk about until they phone in. Well, they said that's a very weak argument. That's we're not going to let that argument stop us professionalizing the recording of the Bible. So you just tell us what bits you want read, and we'll have them recorded. You can't read them, but you can have the actor do it. And I said, you're gagging me. This is obviously no. We're professionalizing you. So I said, if you do this, I'm not going to be put in a position where I'm no longer allowed to read out from the Bible in response to what people ask when they phone in on a phone-in show. And they said, you have no choice. And I said, well, okay, in that case, I resign. So then they said, but you mustn't tell people why you've resigned. You can resign, but I tell you what, you can come back and have another radio show if you don't tell people what you resigned. And so I thought I was being very principled, giving up my radio show for Jesus on principle. And to tell you the truth, I was very excited about being let back in 2 years' time and given another crack at it. So stupidly, naively, egotistically, I said, okay, I won't tell people why you've made me resign. So then I found myself 2 years later on the island of Jersey, and there was a BBC studio there, and it was populated by people who'd been my colleagues and friends. We knew them all from conferences, and I went and knocked on the door and said, hi guys, I'm in Jersey, any work? Hoping they'd say, oh, the great Ashenden is here, let's give him a radio show. And they said, go away, you can't come into the building. And I said, I can? No, you're on a blacklist, you're not allowed on BBC property. I said, but they promised me. They promised me a radio show if I went quietly. No, you can't come across the door. You're blacklisted. Get out.
Wow.
I felt so stupid, but and I was. And then every time, as things are now, I get phoned up by BBC producers saying, Dr. Ashenden, will you come on this program to discuss something? And I say, yes, I will. And then 3 hours before the program goes out, they phone me back and say, we're under rescheduling pressure. The item isn't going to take place anymore. And for the first 2 or 3 times, I used to think, wow, there's a lot of rescheduling pressure in the BBC. But as it happens every single time, they ask me, what happens is a junior producer gets me in because they think I've got something to say. And then someone who runs a blacklist says, you can't have Ashenden on. He's not. Anyway, so I'm now very pleased I'm on YouTube, because otherwise I would be blacklisted.
Well, that must give you great satisfaction to see our YouTube is finally passing the BBC.
It really does.
And I do believe that gap will continue to grow.
I'm sure.
That's the trend. So,
well, for sure, you won't get a conversation like the one we're having anywhere on the BBC. I mean,
that's for sure. And considering that, let's check in again soon about this Iran situation, because I have a feeling next time we check in, it's going to be a very different conversation. Something will have transpired.
I think so. And I'm glad that people who watched our first show together liked what we did. I liked what we did very much. And I think I normally don't do this because I think, the merits of what we do ought to be sufficient. But I think just as we're beginning this new project, we might say to our listeners, if you do like this, please share it. Find 2 or 3 people you think might like to grow the reader base, because one of the ways in which what we're doing gets some kind of leverage is if good, like-minded people share the good stuff. So if you think this is good stuff, please share it, and then we get more leverage as opposed to the BBC, which will get less leverage.
Absolutely. And that gap will continue to grow and people can hear the truth. That's what we want them to hear. So, well, it was great talking to you, Gavin. I look forward to chatting soon.
I have to be polite to you. I live in terror of finding my way into your next novel on Ibiza. Well, in case people haven't read Justin's novel on Ibiza, it really is one of the most marvelous. Tell us a bit about it. We should give you a platform to explain your extraordinary achievements.
Oh, well, The Canticle of Ibiza, you can find it on Amazon. That's my newest novel. And it takes place in the 80s when Ibiza was at its heyday, with all sorts of people. And it's about an American his best friend has vanished on the island. And he leaves his hedge fund job in New York to go find him. But what he finds is something far different than this poor New Yorker ever expected. And I have to say the response has been fantastic. So I've done, readings, signings, and this and that. So it's really been a good response for it. And I think people just like the characters and the drama with it. So I'm thinking of doing a part 2, and you can be sure, Gavin,
don't want to be in it. When I read, Justin said, "Hey, have you read my novel?" And I said, "No, okay, I'll read your novel because it's polite to read your friend's novel." And I read it. I thought, "Oh my goodness, this is not just an ex-lawyer. You actually have a capacity for looking into the human psyche and soul that is really quite scary." And as I read this, I thought, this leaves me with a very serious dilemma. I never want Justin to put me in one of his novels. Anyway,
by the way, I might prank call you this evening pretending to be the BBC. So just prepare yourself. Okay?
It won't work. I would never fall for it. But anyway, okay. So I hope people do buy your novel. It's fantastic. And I'll continue to be polite and try and buy your good favor to avoid appearing in the sequel.
Excellent. All right, Gavin. Great to see you. And we look forward to seeing each other soon. And let's continue to reclaim Christendom.
Amen. Let's do that. Maranatha. Justin, thank you. It's been great.
Thank you.